In the deepest eons of history, before mankind had even emerged from primordial ooze, the Necrontyr dominated the galaxy. But unity receded, even as the bounds of their domain expanded. Fearing the collapse of their civilization, the leaders of the Necrontyr assailed the Old Ones, seeking to wrest from them the secret of eternal life.
Unleash the power of the Necron. Our worlds are infested. Scour them clean. This is my hour.
Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we're continuing our run into Warhammer 40K. I had initially thought about covering a single topic, as I did with our breakdown of the Emperor of Mankind and the Tyranids, links in the description, perhaps by looking at individual Space Marine chapters, the Necrons, the Eldar, or even the Orcs, but I reasoned that plotting down a foundational timeline of the entire Warhammer universe first would be the best way to go forward. And so, today, we're going to begin our deep dive into the extensive historical chronology of the Milky Way Galaxy, as depicted in the Warhammer 40K universe over the next few weeks. This is all with regards to the timeline's relation to humanity and the Imperium of Man. It's a massive undertaking, so I've decided to split the project into 4 or 5 parts. In this video, effectively part 1, we'll be doing an overview of the Prehuman History of the galaxy, with a look at the Old Ones, the Satan, the Necrons, and the Eldar, all of whom are ancient civilisations that existed way before humanity. The plan is to then continue in chronological order through to the 41st millennium in videos that will be released over the next month and a half. Bear in mind, this is just an introduction, and while we'll be discussing the Old Ones, the Satan, the Necrons, and the Eldar, part 1 is merely aimed at fitting them into a chronological timeline of the Warhammer 40K universe. Once the entire timeline has been completed in about June, I will endeavour to explore each of the topics, races, conflicts, gods and empires that we discuss here in more comprehensive individual videos throughout the year. If there's a particular topic covered in the timeline that you want to know more about, let me know in the comments below and I'll endeavour to do a deep dive on it in due time. Before we begin, it's important to note this exploration will be particularly focused on the viewpoints of the Imperium of Man and the Eldar, the two races from where we get our records from. With that said, the vast epochs of history are largely obscured or lost, shrouded in mystery or forgotten over millennia. Certain historians from the Adeptus Administratum tirelessly work to uncover this past, their efforts akin to holding a candle in the vast darkness. Initially, their work might have had a clear purpose, but it has since devolved into a mechanical collection of data. Scribes now mindlessly transcribe information onto scrolls, obsessively maintaining complete records for fear of omitting even the smallest of detail. The true understanding or interpretation of this data is rare, generally limited to a few, who might be viewed with suspicion or even penalized for their zeal. The most expansive archive of such records is located beneath Terra's surface, within vast underholes where mountains of data scrolls reach upwards. Illuminated by the dim light from the floating servo skulls, a procession of curators, scriveners, and ciphers navigate through these corridors of knowledge, striving to shed light on the obscured truths. Over time, many original certainties have been altered or expunged by the revisionists of the Adeptus Ministorum, the Inquisition, and even the High Lords of Terra themselves. That man is beset at all quarters by traitors, mutants, and fiends is self-evident. But in truth, none of these evils shall be our undoing. When the end comes, it will not be at the hand of any mortal being of this or any other realm. Death will come at the hands of the ancients, those who determined our fate eons before we stood erect upon the holy ground of Terra and gazed up into the starry night. The Chrono Strife represents an intense and ongoing dispute within the Order Chronos of the Inquisition, centering on the standard dating system of the Imperium of Man during the Era Indomitus. This conflict emerged after Robot Guilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, Imperial Regent and Primarch of the Ultramarines, was resurrected during the 13th Black Crusade. Guilliman aimed to compile a comprehensive and accurate historical account of the Imperium, a fragmented and often conflicting history, believing that uncovering the truth would propel humanity forward from the darkness that ensued after the Horus Heresy. To achieve this, he established the Logos Historica Verita, a small, specialized imperial organization composed of individuals with a curious and open-minded nature. He personally trained them in objective data-gathering techniques, assigning them the formidable task of uncovering, assembling, and cataloging the lost or inaccurately recorded millennia of human history, distorted by superstition, censorship, or deliberate falsification by the High Lords of Terror. However, the task became even more challenging when Guilliman discovered that even the Emperor's own calendar had not withstood the test of time. Originally, during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the standard imperial dating system had helped to chronologically arrange events. Yet over time, this system deteriorated due to rigid conformity and unthinking revisionism. This degradation led to the emergence of various competing dating systems, complicating the task of creating a true chronicle of the human-settled galaxy. As the first phase of the Indomitus Crusade was concluding, around what was initially believed to be 12 M42, Guilliman attempted to pinpoint the current year using the 5 main factional variations of the imperial calendar. His estimates ranged from the early 41st millennium AD to a full millennium later, not accounting for numerous other minor, often heretical interpretations. In searching for a resolution to the Imperium's convoluted dating system, Guilliman realized that no existing solution could suffice, recognizing that this was yet another issue that would require his direct intervention to rectify. Consequently, all historical dates mentioned for the period after the Horus Heresy should be viewed as mere estimates, with many believing that the 41st millennium has not conclusively ended.
We once knew the gods. They came arrayed in gold and taught us of glory and of lies. They walked from darkness and taught us of death and of fear. They rose from fire and taught us of creation and of oblivion.
The entities later recognized as the star gods came into being concurrently with the moment of creation, emerging from the immense, unthinking energies released by the initial cataclysmic event billions of years ago. During this chaotic intermingling of matter and energy, a sea of stars began to form, and for a prolonged epoch, the universe consisted merely of hot hydrogen gas and light elemental dust, all under the governance of the gravitational forces of countless nascent suns. Before the formation and cooling of the first planets, the initial truly sentient beings arose. These entities, whose consciousness was housed within the force lines created by the plasma and electromagnetic flares of stars, would later be known as the Satan. In the early stages of their existence, however, they bore little resemblance to the malevolent forces they would eventually become. Initially, they were simply vast energy parasites, feeding on the solar energies of their progenitor stars, thereby shortening these stars' lifespans by millions of standard years. Eventually, these star vampires developed the ability to travel along the universe's electromagnetic flux lines, moving away from their birthplaces. They drifted through the cosmic ether to new stellar pastures, resuming their cycle of stellar consumption. As beings composed purely of energy, they ignore the solid masses they encountered in space, such as nascent planets, whose blazing geothermal fires and feeble geomagnetic fields were too insignificant to satisfy their immense appetites. Just as the stars brought forth their offspring, so too did the many planets of the nascent Milky Way Galaxy give rise to life forms made of matter, which embarked on a lengthy evolutionary journey towards self-awareness. Among the galaxy's earliest intelligent life forms to develop a technologically advanced civilization capable of interstellar travel were a reptilian species later dubbed the Old Ones by the Eldar, who were intimately familiar with them. The Old Ones were characterized by their methodical, cold-blooded intelligence, but possessed profound wisdom, having deeply studied the cosmos and advanced the fields of astronomy and physics to levels that, to contemporary humanity, seem more like arcane magic. Their mastery over the universe's mechanics enabled them to manipulate alternative dimensions and execute ambitious projects in psychic engineering. Renowned as powerful psychers, the Old Ones frequently employed warp energies for various technological purposes, including the creation of a network of instantaneous, faster-than-light portals through warp space. These portals link the colony worlds of the Old Ones, enabling them to traverse the immense distances of space in a single step through the numerous warp gates they established. This formed a vast interdimensional network akin to today's webway, though it was much larger and more sophisticated. Utilizing this network, the Old Ones dispersed their progeny across the galaxy and acted as stewards of life, understanding its intrinsic value. They not only seeded new intelligent species, but also terraformed thousands of worlds to suit their specific environmental and geographical standards. Some within the Adeptus Mechanicus speculate that even Terra was influenced by the Old Ones, well before the dawn of human consciousness. Of course, this view is deemed heretical by the ecclesiarchy, which adheres to the Imperial Creed, asserting that mankind was crafted in the God Emperor's image long before his spirit took physical form. The civilization of the Old Ones peaked over 60 million standard years ago, during which they played a significant role in the creation or genetic enhancement of many of the galaxy's currently known intelligent species, including the Eldar, the Krork, ancestors of the Orcs, the Slaanesh, and the Jakari. They also created what would eventually evolve into humanity. The species that would evolve into the Necrons originated billions of standard years before humanity, under a harsh, ravaging star in a remote area of the galaxy known as the Halo Stars region. Subjected to relentless solar winds and intense radiation storms, the original flesh and blood beings known as the Necrontyr led precarious lives marked by frequent death. The limited information the Imperium of Man has gathered about the Necrontyr depicts a people with short and uncertain lifespans, their bodies plagued early and often by severe cancers and other ailments caused by the high levels of ionizing radiation from their sun. Necrontyr settlements were constructed with the inevitability of premature death in mind, where the living eked out existences, overshadowed by massive sepulchres and tombs dedicated to their ancestors. Their ruling dynasties, too, were established with the expectation of early mortality, considering the living as merely transient occupants in a landscape dominated by grand structures built to honor the deceased. On the Necrontyr homeworld, the most significant edifices were always erected for the dead, not the living. Compelled by their harsh conditions, the Necrontyr broke free from their deadly cradle and ventured into space, driven by the hope of establishing an empire where they could escape the deadly influence of their native star. They embarked on their interstellar journey using slow-moving, antimatter-powered torch ships housed in stasis crypts and protected by a resilient living metal known as necrodermis, which was capable of withstanding the lengthy voyages through the void. This marked the beginning of the Necrontyr's colonization of distant worlds. Gradually, their dynasties expanded their reach, eventually bringing much of the ancient galaxy under their control. From the beginning, the leaders of the individual Necrontyr dynasties were governed by the Triarch, a council of 3 monarchs known as the Pharaons. The leader of the Triarch was titled the Silent King, who communicated with his subjects solely through the other 2 Pharaons. Although the role of the Silent King was nominally hereditary, the precarious lifespans of the Necrontyr meant that this title often shifted among different royal families. The era of the Necrontyr culminated during the reign of Zarek, the last Silent King. During their methodical expansion through the stars, the Necrontyr eventually encountered the Old Ones, the ancient species that was far older and more advanced than any other known in the galaxy at that time. As I mentioned earlier, the Old Ones were adept in manipulating forms of energy entirely beyond the Necrontyr's comprehension or capability, and had long mastered the secrets of immortality, a gift they declined to share with the Necrontyr, who still suffered from the genetic afflictions of their harsh native star. The colonization by the Old Ones, accomplished with their warp gates and profound mastery over the Immaterium, was significantly faster and more widespread than that of the Necrontyr. Additionally, the seemingly immortal lifespans of the Old Ones ignited a profound envy within the Necrontyr, which gnawed at their society spiritually, just as physical ailments ravaged their bodies. The realization that another intelligent species could enjoy such longevity while their own lives were mercilessly short filled the Necrontyr with both astonishment and deep-seated jealousy. As time progressed, internal strife intensified among the Necrontyr. Each dynasty sought to forge its own path, leading to fierce conflicts known as the Wars of Secession. Had these circumstances persisted for even one more generation, it's conceivable that the Necrontyr would have faced extinction, a fate common to many species before and after them. As their territory expanded, becoming ever more vast and varied, the unity that had once fortified them weakened, resulting in bitter wars as realms fought for independence. Recognizing the fragmentation, the Triarch concluded that the only path to reunification lay through conflict with an external adversary. However, few could pose a credible threat to the technologically superior Necrontyr. The Old Ones, with their advanced capabilities, stood out as the only formidable opponent who could unite the warring Necrontyr dynasties under a common cause. The rationale for war was straightforward, as the Necrontyr had long harbored resentment towards the Old Ones for their refusal to divulge the secrets of immortality. Consequently, Zarek, the last Silent King, driven by deep-seated jealousy and resentment, declared war on the Old Ones. Simultaneously, in a clever move, he extended an amnesty to any secessionist Necrontyr dynasties that would rejoin the Triarch. Attracted by the prospects of victory and the promise of eternal life, the separatist realms ceased their wars of secession, and the monumental conflict later known as the War in Heaven commenced. This war, unprecedented in its scope, erupted across the stars. Although Zarek and the Triarch had managed to unify their fractured people, it was a war the Necrontyr could not hope to win on their own. We are born for a darker purpose than that of mere existence. There will come a time when Stygian night never ends, where dead stars will spread before us like islands that slumber on the ocean, and when the beings that hid like shadows will feed on us forever. The devastating conflict between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr, later immortalized in Eldar legend as the War in Heaven, was monumental enough to fill volumes. Despite their advanced technology, the Necrontyr were consistently outmaneuvered due to the Old Ones' mastery over the webway portals and warp gates. Gradually, the Necrontyr were repelled to the fringes of the galaxy, relegated to being a minor nuisance to the Old Ones' dominance. Confined once more to their radiation-scarred world among the halo stars, they were effectively exiled and forgotten. Over the millennia, their initial fury morphed into a deep-seated hatred for all other intelligent life and a relentless resolve to take revenge on their seemingly undefeatable foes. However, the specter of defeat once again shattered the fragile unity of the Necrontyr, and the idea of a common enemy no longer unified the various dynasties. After many generations had been born, fought and died in a seemingly futile conflict, numerous Necrontyr dynasties would have preferred to negotiate peace with the Old Ones, had the ruling Triarch allowed it. This discontent sparked a resurgence of the Wars of Secession, now more widespread and destructive than any previous conflicts. The Necrontyr dynasties had become so divided by that point that the Old Ones could have easily eradicated their adversaries, should they have chosen to do so. Confronted with the imminent collapse of their authority, the Triarch desperately sought a solution to restore stability. Their pleas were eventually answered, but the solution would come at a steep and tragic cost to their species. During the rule of the Silent King Zarek, the Necrontyr first encountered the godlike energy beings known as the Satan, though the exact circumstances of this initial contact remain uncertain, with various misleading and contradictory accounts. The dusty archives of the tomb world of Slaanesh suggest it was merely accidental, a chance discovery by a stellar probe investigating a dying star. In contrast, the Book of Mournful Night, securely kept in the Eldar Black Library's most protected sanctum, proposes that the intense hatred the Necrontyr harbored towards the Old Ones acted as a beacon, drawing the Satan across the cosmos. Another narrative indicates that from the inception of their civilization, Necrontyr scientists were deeply immersed in studying stars to safeguard against the harmful energies of their own sun. After centuries of research and driven by desperate need to find a force to wield against the Old Ones, Necrontyr researchers detected unusual electrodynamic anomalies within the oldest dying stars of the galaxy. Within these stars' energetic plasma, they discovered entities of pure energy, older than any physical species, including the Old Ones. These beings, born at the dawn of the stars, subsisted on the solar flares and magnetic storms of the aging red giants. To the Necrontyr, these entities represented the ultimate weapon against their enemies, aligning with the death god they had worshipped for ages. Regardless of how the initial encounter transpired, the influence of the C'tan quickly extended over the oldest Necrontyr dynasties, marking a pivotal chapter in their history. The power of the C'tan was profound, manifesting the raw energy of the stars into sentient forms, and they were thus revered by the Necrontyr as star gods. They effectively existed on a scale far exceeding that of whole planets, with consciousnesses too expansive for humanoids to fully grasp. The methods by which the Necrontyr communicated with them remain a mystery to the Adeptus Mechanicus. What is known, though, is that recognizing that these diffused beings could not interact with the material universe without a physical form, some Necrontyr endeavored to gain the C'tan's favor by crafting physical vessels for them. This was done using the same living metal, necrodermis, previously utilized for their colony ships. According to fragmentary Eldar legends, streams of electromagnetic force transition through space, coiling into these newly formed bodies across a bridge of incorporeal starlight. Once embodied, the C'tan assumed the physical likeness of the ancient gods of the Necrontyr, masking their true intentions under a guise of deferential servitude. In these necrodermis shells, unimaginable forces were contained as the full might of the C'tan was realized. As they focused their consciousnesses in these new forms, the C'tan began to relish the sensory experiences available to material beings, a stark contrast to their previous existence. The electromagnetic energy emitted by the Necrontyr's bodies ignited a novel appetite within the C'tan, far more tantalizing than the bland, albeit sustaining, energies of stellar radiation. In this context, one of the C'tan, known to his kin as Mephitran the Deceiver for his cunning and duplicity, approached the Silent King Zarek. Acting as a herald for his brethren, Mephitran was not recognized by Zarek for his true deceitful nature. He was granted an audience, and he recounted a primordial conflict fought between the C'tan and the Old Ones, a war the C'tan had lost. Subsequently fearing retribution, he and his siblings had concealed themselves, waiting for a time when they might find allies to help exact their revenge on the Old Ones. In exchange for their support, the Deceiver promised the Necrontyr everything they longed for, restored unity and the immortality they had craved. He claimed that there would be no cost for these great gifts, presenting them as mere tokens for valued allies. Such were the assurances of the Deceiver, whose relationship with truth was so tangled that perhaps even he could not discern the extent of his own deceit. Yet his words resonated with Zarek, who was deeply troubled by the recurrent divisions fracturing his people. Zarek spent many solar months deliberating with the other two pharaohs of the Triarch and his royal court's nobles. Amidst these discussions, Orican, the court astrologer of the Triarch, stood alone in opposition. He predicted that while the alliance with the C'tan might herald a new era of glory, it would ultimately cost the Necrontyr their very souls. Despite these warnings, the lure of desire and ambition quickly overshadowed caution, leading to the dismissal of Orican's prophecy, and a year following the Deceiver's proposal, the Triarch consented to the alliance, sealing the fate of their species. As the Necrontyr marveled at their newfound powers, the C'tan began to assert dominance over their benefactors. Manifesting almost godlike abilities, the C'tan quickly ascended from benefactors to beings of worship among the Necrontyr, who revered them as the star gods they were named. Whether altered by their assimilation into the material realm or inherently malevolent from their celestial origins, the C'tan revealed a cruel and whimsical nature, akin to the capricious stars that had birthed them. They indulged in the devout worship offered by the Necrontyr and voraciously consumed the life energies of countless mortal beings, drawn to their electromagnetic vitality. We are less than cattle to these beings, chattel to be cast aside, consumed or made sport with for their pleasure. There is not one amongst them that would pay heed to a world of man, as I would to an ant on my boot.
The star gods, the C'tan, walked amongst them, offering prized immortality and long-sought victory. So ended the Necrontyr of old. Betrayed by the ambition of Zarek, the Silent King, they were dragged in chains to the fires of biotransference, transmuted from fragile and radiation-cursed bodies to forms more suited for the ravages of war.
Equipped with divinely powerful weapons and starships capable of instantaneous galactic travel through quantum phase technology, the Necrontyr were poised to renew their war against the Old Ones. However, the C'tan had another boon for their mortal allies. They offered the Necrontyr a path to the immortality and physical stability they'd long desired. The diseased flesh of the Necrontyr would be replaced with a living metal necrodermis, akin to the substance composing the physical forms of their star gods. Their organic bodies would be consumed, and in their new metallic forms, they would be liberated to exact their vengeance on the Old Ones in a universe they perceived as hostile, free from the frailties of their detested flesh. With the agreement between the Necrontyr and the C'tan solidified, the Star Gods disclosed the nature of the immortality that awaited the Necrontyr, initiating the massive Biotransference process. Gigantic biofoundries were erected, and under the terms of the pact made by the Silent King, his people entered these facilities. The exact horrors they endured inside the roaring biofurnaces are unfathomable, but it is known that each Necrontyr was stripped of both flesh and soul, their bodies replaced with casings of necrodermis, mirroring the C'tan, animated by the remnants of their fading consciousness. As the Necrontyr were transformed, the ethereal forms of the C'tan swirled above each furnace, feasting on the spiritual and electromagnetic remnants of a whole species. It was only when the Silent King himself underwent biotransference and witnessed the transformation of his people that he grasped the deadly reality of his bargain. While he had attained immortality and immense power, it had cost him his soul, already consumed by the C'tan hovering above. As Zarek witnessed the C'tan devouring the life essence of his people, he came to understand the profound error of his decision. In some respects, he felt rejuvenated, free from the myriad pains and uncertainties of organic life. His new mechanical form was vastly superior to the fragile body he had endured for so long, and his thoughts were sharper and more rapid than ever before. However, he experienced a profound emptiness, a void in his spirit that defied logical explanation. It became chillingly clear to him that the cost of physical immortality was the loss of his soul. With deep regret, the Silent King saw the destiny he had imposed on his people. The Necrontyr had vanished into history, replaced by the soulless, immortal beings now known as the Necrons. Despite the severe cost, Biotransference had delivered on the C'tan's promises. Even the most humble Necrontyr now possessed immortality. Their new mechanical forms were impervious to age and the corrosive effects of radiation, and only catastrophic damage could completely annihilate them. The Biotransference also embedded engrammatic command protocols within every Necron, ensuring the unwavering loyalty of Zarek's subjects. Initially, the Silent King valued this absolute obedience, which was a stark contrast to the discord and disunity that had plagued the Necrontyr Empire. With the entire species under his control, the Necrons were bound to uphold their grim pact. However, as time passed, Zarek became burdened by his omnipotence and wary of removing the command protocols. He feared that his subjects might seek retribution for the grave affliction he had inflicted upon them. Biotransference effectively stripped the Necrontyr of nearly all traces of their consciousness, leaving behind only ghostly remnants. Only a select few among the nobility and military, those with the strongest wills, managed to retain some semblance of intellect and self-awareness, though they too were mere shadows of their former selves, having lost much of what made them distinct individuals. Initially, most Necrons were indifferent to their loss. Their sole concern was the immortality, free from disease and death, as promised by their star gods. The C'tan, having consumed the souls of an entire species, were invigorated and became an unstoppable force. With the undying legions of Necrons at their command, the demise of the Old Ones seemed inevitable. The only vestige of the Necrontyr that remained was their deep-seated hatred for all other sentient life forms in the universe. Armies of these undying warriors, encased in living metal, embarked on campaigns across the galaxy aboard their tomb ships, leaving a trail of destruction. The Old One's expertise in warp manipulation was now matched by the C'tan's dominance over the physical realm, and the ancient foes of the Necrons suffered immense losses in the ensuing cosmic carnage. They will seek to harvest us at first, but they will be hungry after their long sleep. Then they will turn their efforts to enslaving the survivors. The galaxy will bleed the stench of death into the void, and it will attract the others of their kind. We must choose unity or death.
Stripped of flesh, of mortality, even of their souls, the Necrontyr passed from history. Only the Necrons remained. Now enslaved to the will of the Catan, the Necrons at last altered the course of the war. Cosmic battle lines buckled and at last broke beneath the tide of immortal fury.
United in battle, the Catan and the Necrons presented an unstoppable force, spelling doom for the Old Ones. Empowered by the life force of the Necrontyr, the Catan unleashed unimaginable destruction. Planets were obliterated, suns snuffed out, and entire star systems were consumed by black holes summoned by the reality-bending might of the star gods. The Necron legions breached the webway, attacking the Old Ones across the galaxy, and laying siege to the strongholds of their numerous allies among the younger sentient species, harvesting the Defenders' life energies to satiate their ravenous Catan overlords. A pivotal moment in the war in heaven was the Necrons' breach of the Old One's webway, primarily facilitated by the Catan known as Niyat, the Burning One. Long yearning to extend his eldritch flames into this beyond space, Niyat guided the Necrons on how to penetrate the extra-dimensional boundaries of the webway. Utilizing living stone portals known as the Dolmen Gates, the Necrons turned the Old One's most formidable asset against them, significantly hastening the war's conclusion. The Dolmen Gates, however, offered entryways into the webway that were far less stable or controllable than the natural webway entrances scattered across the galaxy. Interestingly, the webway seems to possess a self-protective mechanism that detects breaches made by the Dolmen Gates, triggering its arcane systems to quickly isolate the compromised section from the rest of its labyrinthine dimension. Thus, Necrons using these gates had to navigate quickly through the shifting corridors of the webway to reach their destinations before the network's safeguards potentially led to their eradication. In the modern era, countless eons after the Necrons first used the Dolmen Gates to invade their archenemy's domain, the landscape of conflict has drastically changed. The Old Ones no longer exist, and the webway has deteriorated into a convoluted and fragmented labyrinth. During the period known as the Necrons' Great Sleep, many Dolmen Gates were either lost or forsaken, and the Eldar, successors to the Old Ones as custodians of the webway, have destroyed many others. The few remaining gates now offer limited access to the vast network of the webway, with significant portions deliberately sealed off by the Eldar to prevent further misuse. Despite these restrictions, the remnants of the webway still provide the Necrons a means of travel that surpass the capabilities of younger species. This advantage is crucial since the Necrons, lacking psychers due to the soul loss incurred during Biotransference, are also unable to utilize warp travel. Without the webway, they would be relegated to the use of slow-moving stasis ships, effectively confining them to interstellar isolation. Following their triumphs, the Catan and their immortal Necron legions came to dominate the galaxy. The last strongholds of the Old Ones fell under siege, and the sentient species they had fostered were reduced to mere sustenance for the Catan's insatiable appetite. To the younger races of the galaxy, the Necrons and their star gods emerged as tyrannical overlords, ruthlessly culling populations to satiate the Catan's endless craving for life force. In this way, the Catan became figures of dread, demanding both worship and fear from the mortals under their dominion. For reasons not fully understood, likely driven by their insatiable cravings for mortal life energies, the Catan began to conflict with each other, motivated by both sport and malice. An ancient Eldar myth recounts how their laughing god cunningly induced a Catan known as the Outsider to turn against its kin, sparking a prolonged struggle for dominance. During this fratricidal conflict, the Catan wreaked havoc across the cosmos. Cities erected by the labor of millions were repeatedly destroyed. As the Red Harvest conducted by the Catan and their Necron forces dwindled, the star gods resorted to cannibalizing each other, diminishing their numbers until only a few remained, who then continued their bitter rivalry for eons. Meanwhile, the Old Ones, previously characterized by their enduring patience and indomitable will, were driven to desperation under the relentless Necron onslaught. Leveraging their advanced scientific acumen, they engineered new intelligent species with enhanced psychic connections to the warp, aiming to forge defenders capable of wielding psychic powers. Among these creations were the precursors to the Eldar and various other Xenos races such as the Rishan, the Canib, and the Krork. As millennia on Terra passed, the efforts of the Old Ones began to yield results, even as the Catan and their Necron servants persisted in their galactic purge of life. That we, in our arrogance, believe that humankind was first among the races of this galaxy will be exposed as folly of the worst kind upon the awakening of these ancient beings. Any hopes, Dreams or promises of salvation are naught but dust in the wind. Utilizing their warp-derived abilities, the Old One's psychically empowered servant species began to spread throughout the galaxy, effectively countering the sophisticated technology of the Necrons. Confronted with these psychic forces, which are inherently toxic to beings of their soulless, purely physical nature, the C'tan's empire began to crumble. Despite their capacity for destruction, the C'tan could not halt the combined onslaught of the Old Ones and their nascent allies as they surged across the cosmos. In response to this existential threat, the few remaining C'tan, for the first time in millions of Terran years, coordinated their efforts. They embarked on a grand scheme to shield the material universe from the warp, thereby neutralizing the psychic powers of the Old Ones. This endeavor's initial manifestations were the immense pylons found on the Imperial fortress world of Cadia. These structures formed complex networks across the planet's surface, stabilizing the space-time near the Eye of Terror, known as the Cadian Gate. Given their godlike capabilities, the C'tan were close to succeeding in their grand design. However, the Old One's earlier actions set off an unexpected cataclysm. The collective psychic imperfections and growing pains of the younger species caused a tumult within the psychically sensitive Immaterium. The turmoil of the war in heaven reflected back from the depths of the warp, known as the Sea of Souls. This upheaval caused the amassed souls released during the conflict to ignite previously dormant energies within the warp, and thus, older beings residing within the Immaterium morphed into the formidable psychic predators, preying on the souls of the exposed psychers. As their realm was disrupted and reshaped, these entities evolved into the terrifying forces that would eventually populate the realm of chaos. As the Materium's conflict stirred the warp's inhabitants into a frenzy, these entities voraciously gathered at the fissures between the Immaterium and the physical universe, eagerly seeking entry points into the material realm. In a desperate bid to defend their diminishing strongholds, the Old Ones engineered new warrior species, including the technology-imitating Jakaro and the formidable green-skinned Krork, ancestors of today's Orcs. However, their efforts proved insufficient, and the Old One's expansive webway network was compromised from the Immaterium, leading to its loss. Several of their warp gates were intentionally destroyed to prevent warp entities from invading uncorrupted worlds, and many of the Old One's most significant creations and power centers were overtaken by the very horrors their innovations had unleashed. Among the most dreadful of these horrors were the Enslavers, warp entities capable of dominating the minds of younger species and using possessed psychers to create their own portals into the material realm. Their increasing emergence marked a catastrophic turning point for the Old Ones as the Enslavers overran their servants. This cataclysm, triggered by the advent of the younger species, ultimately dismantled the remnants of the Old Ones, erasing their dominion over the galaxy. The war in heaven had already pushed life to the brink of annihilation. Now, with the Enslavers breaching the Immaterium in overwhelming numbers, the outlook for any survivors seemed dire. Ultimately, overwhelmed by the relentless advance of the C'tan and the devastating warp-spawn threats they'd inadvertently unleashed, the Old Ones met their defeat. They were scattered and obliterated, leaving their fate ambiguous. Whether they went extinct or fled the galaxy to seek refuge elsewhere remains uncertain. Throughout the final phases of the war in heaven, Zarek the Silent King strategically waited for the opportune moment when the C'tan would be most susceptible to attack. Although he commanded the entire Necron species, confronting the C'tan at their zenith was impractical. Moreover, even if he could defeat them, the Necrons would then have to continue the war against the Old Ones and their increasingly formidable allies alone. Thus, it was crucial that the Old Ones were thoroughly vanquished before holding the C'tan accountable for the atrocities inflicted upon the Necrontyr. When the C'tan eventually secured victory in their great war, their celebration was brief. With one formidable foe vanquished and the other weakened from the prolonged conflict, Zarek finally incited the Necrons to rebel. Caught off guard by their hubris, the C'tan were unprepared for the revolt. The Necrons, under the guidance of their most adept cryptechs, harnessed the immense energies of the living universe to forge weapons of unimaginable power, god-killing hypercannons. These weapons were so formidable that not even the Star Gods were able to withstand them. The battles that ensued were so intense that they altered the very fabric of causality, and memories of these conflicts are scarce among the Necron elite. After the conflict, Zarek chose to erase knowledge of these devastating weapons from his warriors, fearing future misuse.
As the last of the Old Ones fell, Zarek led what remained of his people in revolt against their Catan masters. The Star Gods were overthrown, shattered into shards, and forced to serve those they had once ruled.
Despite their might, the Catan, being immortal and woven into the fabric of reality, were nearly indestructible. Instead of total annihilation, each Catan was fragmented into thousands of less powerful shards, each retaining the personality traits of the original entity, yet this outcome aligned with Zarek's intentions. He had anticipated the impossibility of their complete destruction and planned accordingly, confining each Catan shard within a multidimensional tesseract labyrinth, effectively trapping them like the mythic Terran Jinn inside a bottle. The victory came at a tremendous cost. Millions of Necrons were lost, including all members of the Triarch except for Zarek himself. Despite these losses, the Necrons regained control over their destiny, finally free from the dominion of their star gods. Lucky creatures, at long last you have found the tranquility of death. I was like you once, clinging to life and blind to the truth. When I uncovered the truth, I too shuddered and paled with fear. Deep in these catacombs I was remade. Here, my brethren slumbered for eons while the living grew like weed. My Lord knew this day would come. He had plans for us all. We would purge this world once more. So come, poor victims of life. We will grant you tranquility in these crypts. Kronos will be a tomb world once more.
Centuries of war had taken their toll on both the Necrons and the galaxy. To preserve what remained of their empire, the Necrons retreated to colossal stasis tombs to sleep away millennia while their domain healed and their rivals passed into dust.
The Necrons, having always prioritized science and mastery over the material realm, derived a grim satisfaction from witnessing the downfall of the Old One's civilization, a collapse precipitated by their over-reliance on psychic powers and the end of the Catan rule over them. However, even with the Old Ones and the Catan defeated, the Silent King recognized that the Necrons' era in the galaxy had temporarily concluded. He decided that he would let the enslavers overrun what remained of intelligent life, turning the galaxy into a desolate wasteland. Over time, he surmised the Psyker infestation would dwindle, and new, simpler life forms would emerge, ones potentially easier for the Necrons to subjugate in the future. Furthermore, the Necrons acknowledged that the mantle of galactic dominance was set to pass to the Eldar, a psychically gifted species that allied with the Old Ones during the War in Heaven, and had developed a deep-seated hatred for the Necrons. The Eldar had endured where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, drained by the extensive loss of life and resources in their revolt against the Catan, were in no position to challenge them. Yet the Silent King was aware that the reign of the Eldar would also eventually wane, as is the fate of all flesh-bound beings. It would take millions of Terran years for the Eldar's influence to diminish, but crucially, the Necrons would remain, ready to capitalize on this decline. Thus the Silent King commanded that the remaining Necron cities be converted into vast tomb complexes filled with stasis crypts. He was content to let the Eldar shape the galaxy for the interim. They were, after all, merely transient compared to the eternal Necrons. His final edict was for his people to enter a long sleep, lasting 60 million standard years, after which they would awaken, prepared to reclaim their lost grandeur and restore the Necron dynasties to their former might. This decree was the Silent King's last command, and as the final tomb world sealed its vaults, Zarek dismantled the engrammatic command protocols that allowed him to control his subjects, acknowledging his failure to lead them effectively. Without lingering, Zarek, the last of the Silent Kings from the Triarch, ventured into the starless void beyond the galaxy, seeking solace and penance for his actions. Eons elapsed while the Necrons lay dormant, their machine servants and constructs vigilantly standing guard over the tomb worlds, now stripped of all life to deter the enslavers. This strategy proved remarkably effective until the 41st millennium, when the awakening Necrons were encountered by the forces of the Imperium of Man. This rekindled old conflicts and introduced them to a galaxy vibrant with life, yet eerily reminiscent of the era they had departed 60 million standard years earlier. The galaxy, teeming anew with life, continued to be plagued by rampant psychers and devotees of the chaotic warp energies first unleashed during the War in Heaven. For the Necron dynasties to reclaim their dominance over the galaxy, a series of complex maneuvers must unfold. First, the agents of chaos need to be vanquished. The formidable Eldar, inheritors of the Old One's legacy, must be eliminated, humanity subdued, and the project to sever the material universe from the warp must be completed to usher in a new era of Necron rule. But the Necrons possess timelessness and immortality on their side, with technological prowess that remains unrivaled by any of the younger spacefaring civilizations. And in the grand scheme of things, time invariably favors the undying Necrons. Order, unity, obedience. We taught the galaxy these things long ago, and we will do so again. Trust not in their appearance, for the Eldar are as alien to good, honest men as the vile Tyranids and savage orcs. There is no understanding them, for there is nothing to understand. They are a random force in the universe.
The region of space now known as the Eye of Terror was once home to the Aeldari Empire. A prideful, sensuous people, the Aeldari realized too late the perils of excess.
The ancient Eldar, who once reigned supreme over the galaxy, possess a history that spans millennia, marked by magnificence and eventual catastrophe. At the pinnacle of their power, the Eldar's worlds were utopian, their abilities were unrivaled, and their military forces were without equal. Over the Terran centuries, however, their dominance led to a level of arrogance that precipitated a devastating collapse of their empire. Despite their efforts to escape the inevitable downfall through exodus on vast starships known as craft worlds, or by secluding themselves on remote verdant planets or within private realms, they could not avoid disaster. Their once flawless empire was marred by their increasing pride. Over 1 million Terran years ago, the Eldar alone commanded the cosmos, confident in their sovereignty and secure in their superiority. This sense of invulnerability was not entirely baseless, as no other race had challenged their prosperity and power for countless ages. Convinced they were beyond any external threats, the Eldar overlooked the internal dangers brewing within their civilization. At their zenith, they believed that all was in their grasp, and no indulgence was off limits. They traversed the stars freely, reveling in the galaxy's myriad delights and crafting worlds solely for their enjoyment, with the power to manipulate the very life and death of stars. Unbeknownst to them, or perhaps ignored, a dark fate loomed, more insidious than any external foe, a doom emanating from within their own ranks, poised to shatter their splendid existence. Across hundreds of paradisal planets dispersed throughout the galaxy, the Eldar freely pursued their desires, delving into every conceivable curiosity and dream. They conquered the complexities of the webway, a labyrinthine dimension, expanded their dominions to the furthest reaches of reality, and acquired vast knowledge about the universe, much of which has since been lost. Upon death, their spirits seamlessly rejoined the Immaterium, ready to be reborn, as the warp at that time did not pose the threat to Eldar souls that it does following their catastrophic fall. Despite their tranquility, conflicts were inevitable. Even in the galaxy's youth, emerging species attempted to carve out their empires, challenging the Eldar, and thus the Eldar engaged in numerous battles, including extensive wars with the vast Necron dynasties, which devastated many star systems and claimed trillions of lives. Yet most of these wars were fleeting, and the Eldar's swift victories only reinforced their sense of supremacy. Even their most significant conflict, occurring over 60 million Terran years ago, an alliance forged with the legendary Old Ones, remembered as the War in Heaven, did not diminish their pride. In their view, they remained the unrivaled rulers of the galaxy, unthreatened by any external power. It was silent as the void, and to look upon it was to know terror. It drifted above us with slow liquid grace, and its gaze caused madness and despair wherever it fell. Those it came near took their own lives rather than endure its hellish presence. The descent of the Eldar race into catastrophe was triggered by their deep-seated compulsion to indulge in their passions to extremes. Over time, the Eldar outgrew the necessity for physical labor or traditional agriculture thanks to their advanced, automated technologies. Their society was structured to effortlessly supply all essentials of life, leaving its members centuries of Terran time to indulge their every whim and desire, setting the stage for their eventual downfall. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, many Eldar succumbed to their most hedonistic impulses. Exotic cults devoted to arcane knowledge and sensory indulgence proliferated across their domains, overshadowing the noble pursuits of earlier times. The heart of the Eldar race increasingly turned inward, relentlessly exploring the extremes of emotion and sensation. This path proved dangerously decadent and ultimately corrosive to their spiritual essence, as the pursuit of excess cast a shadow over their entire society. The activities of these pleasure cults evolved beyond mere curiosity or severe addiction, and Eldar from all parts of the Empire indulged in their most unnatural desires, plunging into debauchery. As these cults tightened their grip on the society, the Eldar became sharply divided. Those who recognized the corruption and sought to escape it became known as the Exodites, fleeing to establish colonies on the edges of the Eldar Empire. As the civilization descended further into chaos, others, repenting their decadent ways, took refuge in deep space aboard massive world ships called craft worlds. Yet, most of the Eldar continued to revel in depravity. The grief of those who mourned their lost innocence gradually transformed into bitterness and malice, and inevitably, fratricidal conflicts erupted, and the sadistic predators prowled in search of victims to satiate their depraved cravings. No life was spared in the relentless quest for murderous and perverse pleasures. It's here that a pervasive moral decay began to afflict their race, with blood running in the streets amid the savage cries of the masses. Their hidden enclaves within the webway, a labyrinthine network bridging real space and the warp, turned into vast dens of greed and cruelty. Entire worlds within this network were reshaped to facilitate the pursuit of the most sinister experiences. As the moral decay of the Eldar deepened, their excessive ecstasy and agony sent ripples through time and space, reaching into the Imperium, a parallel dimension where psychic reflections of intense emotions begin to solidify, shaped by the turbulent currents of the Imperium. In the shadows of the warp, a nascent deity of excess gained strength, fueled by the Eldar's depravity. Every moment of anger, hate, deceit, pain, suffering, pleasure, and desire is mirrored in the power of chaos. When its legions march, they march to return upon us a ruin that is of our own making.
The fourth chaos god, Slaanesh, was born from their debauchery, its coming heralded by a psychic scream that shook real space to its foundations and devastated the Aeldari.
In the warp, thoughts and emotions from real space merge into streams of psychic energy, gaining consciousness as they absorb similar sentiments. Depending on the intensity of these emotions, these entities can become beings of varying power. Amid the chaotic psychic energies of the Imperium, the sheer corruption and decadence of the Eldar took physical form, creating a gestalt consciousness of terrifying proportions. This entity, a grotesque mirror of the Eldar's fallen nobility and unchecked shamelessness, grew potent in the dark depths of the warp. As the Eldar engaged in acts of slaughter, revelry and cannibalism on their worlds, this great enemy edged closer to full awareness. Only too late did the Eldar realize they had birthed a god in their own monstrous image, a god that fed on the darkest aspects of their souls. While the first three Chaos Gods became self-aware entities by the middle of the second millennium, which we'll dive into in the next video, in the 30th millennium, at the end of the Age of Strife, the most horrifying and perverse major Chaos God, known as Slaanesh, was conceived. The Eldar, who refused to utter its name, called it Silantresh, or She Who Thirsts in Low Gothic. When Slaanesh finally awakened to divine consciousness, its emergence was catastrophic. With a surge of raw power, it tore through the fabric of the universe. A psychic shockwave annihilated billions of Eldar souls, instantly claiming their lives as they felt the grasp of their own dark creation. From the instant Slaanesh came into existence, every living Eldar soul was doomed. With the death of their physical bodies, their souls would inevitably be pulled into the warp, where they would suffer eternal torment within the psychic maw of She Who Thirsts. In a single devastating moment, the once glorious Eldar civilization, which had endured for millennia, was gutted, leaving behind a chaotic remnant. As Slaanesh took its first diabolical breath, the souls of the Eldar were ripped from them and devoured. Drunk on the powerful essence of billions of souls, Slaanesh reveled in its birth and eyed a universe now vulnerable to its influence. Perfidious Eldar! These aliens had the stars in their grasp and now were left to sift the dust of their once fabulous realm. For all their intellect and mysticism, they could not contain the beast within them, nor tame the wild monsters of the shadow. Why should we pay them any heed? The epicenter of this psychic catastrophe was located at the heart of the Eldar Empire. The disaster left all Eldar within thousands of light years as lifeless husks, their spirits irrevocably claimed by She Who Thirsts. Even those who anticipated the disaster and escaped on craft worlds found only a handful of their father's fleet surviving, while others were overwhelmed by the cataclysm. The remote exodite maiden worlds were largely spared, yet in that brief moment, the fate of the Eldar was sealed as a doomed race, haunted eternally by their own creation. Though primarily an Eldar catastrophe, the psychic shockwave also impacted billions of humans, orcs, and other intelligent beings, resulting in massive casualties. The entire fabric of reality was disrupted, with warp space convulsing like a cosmic hurricane, tearing across the galaxy. The dimensional barriers between the warp and the material universe ruptured, transforming hope into despair and paradise into nightmares. Psykers across all species suffered immensely, their agonies echoed by their kin dying in tumultuous storms of blood and madness. The catastrophic tear in real space caused by the birth of Slaanesh expanded until it enveloped the ancient domains of the Eldar. This vast breach, known as the Eye of Terror, was the largest known overlap between the warp and the material universe until the emergence of the Dethadian, the Great Rift. Within the Eye, demons revel in the pure energies of the Immaterium, while demon princes and followers of chaos dominate the twisted remnants of what were once Eldar paradises, now transformed into worlds of fire and shadow. For 10 millennia preceding the Eldar's fall, the warp had been a tumultuous sea of storms, severely hindering stellar travel for less powerful races. However, with the advent of Slaanesh, the warp's tempest briefly subsided, settling into a new balance as Slaanesh ascended to join the ranks of the major chaos gods. This quelling of the warp storms around ancient terror concluded what humanity recalls as the Age of Strife, enabling the rise of the Emperor of Mankind, who initiated his great crusade to reunite humanity's scattered worlds. This era marked a pivotal shift in the galaxy's power dynamics, as isolated human civilizations were drawn together under a single banner. Thus, the downfall of the Eldar indirectly precipitated the ascent of the burgeoning Imperium of Man, granting humanity dominion over the stars. The first thing one must learn about the Eldar is that they are a race of fragments, broken and scattered across the galaxy. In culture, geography, and technology, the disparate elements of the Eldar race vary wildly. Even within a single sub-race, the so-called kindreds of the craft-world Eldar Exodites, Dark Eldar, and the mysterious Harlequins, there is great diversity of tradition and attitude.
The Aeldari have never recovered from the horrors of the fall. They are a fractured, dwindling population on the brink of extinction. Most dwell aboard star-treading craft worlds, honing their peerless minds along the disciplined paths in the hope of staving off the perils of decadence and thus preventing a second, final catastrophe.
The creation of Slaanesh, drawn from the infinite currents of the warp, presented the Eldar with a formidable nemesis. Slaanesh, ever craving the essence of the Eldar, transformed their fate dramatically. Previously, when an Eldar died, their spirit would serenely transition into the warp for rebirth. Now they are doomed to endure endless suffering, as Slaanesh possesses an insatiable and malevolent hunger for their souls. She Who Thirsts relentlessly seeks to claim every soul of the Eldar race. The scattered survivors of this once magnificent civilization are acutely aware of their doomed fate. In the vastness of space, those who fled the destruction on craft worlds hold tightly to the remnants of the Eldar Empire's culture. They regard themselves as the legitimate descendants of Ashur-Yan, the Phoenix King of the Eldar pantheon, and strive to preserve their heritage through arts, architecture, and the oral traditions of songs, dances, and the recounting of myths and fables. They are known as the Ashur-Yani. These remnants of the Eldar navigate the cosmic seas aboard massive vessels, always evading She Who Thirsts. They achieve this primarily through spirit stones. Upon an Ashur-Yani's death, their soul is secured within a waystone, a valuable psycho-reactive crystal designed for this purpose.
The Crone Worlds are all that remain of the Eldari's fallen domain. They are blighted planets, consumed by the spreading unreality of the Eye of Terror, and twisted to new and nightmarish realities. Though the Crone Worlds are overrun by the servants of the Dark Gods, the Eldari have not entirely abandoned them. They cannot, for only here can the treasured spirit stones be harvested, and thus the souls of the dying be saved from thirsting Slaanesh.
The Spirit Stone is later collected from the deceased and integrated into the Infinity Circuit, a crystalline, psychic network embedded within the Wraithbone core of each craft world, safeguarding the spirits from the warp's dangers and enabling them to protect the living in a sort of twilight existence. As mentioned before, beyond the Asuryani, other survivors of the Fall inhabit the lush remote maiden worlds, known as the Exodites. These worlds, wild and untamed, demand a rugged existence far removed from the sophistication known to their ancestors. Here, the Exodites lead largely pre-industrial lives, deliberately ignoring the advanced technology of their predecessors to maintain a focused, aesthetic lifestyle. The Exodites live in symbiosis with their adopted worlds, where the world spirits, akin to the infinity circuits of the craft worlds, preserve the souls of the deceased Exodites using similar technologies. Fiercely protective of their isolationist lifestyle, the Exodites are prepared to defend their homes vigorously, although they often form alliances with the Asuryani of the craft worlds. Sequestered within the hidden city realms of the Webway, particularly in the vast dark city of the Komorag, certain Eldar survivors enjoy protection due to ancient psychic safeguards installed by the Old Ones. Here in these dens of vice, these Eldar, called the Jakari, indulge in the same decadent behaviors that precipitated their civilization's downfall, scoffing at those devastated by the collapse from the relative safety of this twilight zone between reality and the warp.
The Jakari, too, live outside the structures of the Eldari path. Corrupt and cruel, they keep Slaanesh at bay, not with discipline and spirit stones, but by feasting on the torment of others. Raiders and slavers all, the Jakari are a blight upon the galaxy, as selfish as they are sadistic, as untrustworthy as they are cunning.
Despite their bravado, the Jakari are acutely aware that regardless of their efforts to stave off their doom by feeding on the psychic distress of other beings, they are ultimately doomed to fall to Slaanesh. Additionally, a smaller contingent of Eldar has retreated further into the obscure reaches of the Webway, protected and led by Kegarak, the Laughing God, one of the few Eldar deities to survive. Known as the Harlequins, they are embraced in every surviving Eldar community, where they perform dances, dramas and martial displays that not only preserve, but celebrate the Eldar's ancient legends and history. Through these performances, they fulfill a crucial role in maintaining the collective memory of a race increasingly fearful of facing a future without a legacy. Since the time of the Fall, our race has been haunted by what we, in our reckless pursuit of hedonistic indulgence, gave birth to. Though our dreams once overturned worlds and quenched suns, we are now but fitful shadows clinging to the edge of existence. All the stars in the sky cannot blot out the hateful glare of the red moon's eye. The birthing place of the great enemy pulses with all the malice of a demon that is dreaming, casting its shadow over all we have ever done and all we ever shall. Every twisted strand of fate and casting of the runes leads me to this time, to this place, and it is clear that the final battle awaits me at the ancient Crone Worlds. As the Eldar grapple with the relentless threat of a ravenous, malevolent deity, they also face a galaxy that has shifted dramatically from under their feet. In the turbulent aftermath of the Eldar's fall, humanity has risen to dominance. The Imperium of Man, venerating the Emperor of Mankind as a divine corpse god, has conquered vast swaths of the galaxy. The slow maturation of the Eldar, whose development spans nearly a century, puts them at a stark disadvantage against humans, whose populations expand with the rapidity of vermin. The burgeoning legions of humanity have not only crushed many threats in their relentless expansion, but have also inadvertently stirred numerous others. The Eldar perceive in humanity the same flaws that precipitated their own ruin, and fear a grim fate awaiting the human race due to the Imperium's relentless xenophobia, thirst for power, and perpetual warfare. This surge of dark emotions from humanity feeds the power of the Dark Gods and sets the stage for further incursions by the forces of chaos. Moreover, the Imperium's aggressive stance has inadvertently magnified the threat posed by the Orcs. Unaware of the consequences, humanity's constant engagements with the Orcs only fuels their strength. The Orcs have proliferated to such an extent that many Asayani seers believe they've reached a critical mass, beyond the point where any extensive culling could effectively reduce their numbers. If the varying Orc hordes were to unify, the Eldar acknowledged that even their sophisticated strategies and cunning would be insufficient to prevent the Orcs from overwhelming the galaxy. In recent millennia, the Eldar have faced a resurgence of ancient adversaries and the emergence of new threats. Prominent among these are the Tyranids, whose invasion fleets, having traversed the interstellar void with the sole intent to feed, see each craft world and exodite planet as a rich source of biomass coveted by their hive mind. From the galactic east, the Tau, among the youngest and arguably most naive of the galaxy's starfaring civilizations, conduct a campaign of ideological assimilation and conquest. Simultaneously, across numerous tomb worlds, the Necrons have awakened from their great sleep.
The Necrons, forgotten by all but the Aeldari, are returning to claim what was theirs. They will abide no trespassers.
As ancient foes of the Eldar, predating even the Fall, the Necrons are eager to rekindle their old rivalry with their now weakened adversaries. Overshadowing these dangers, the direst of the Eldar prophecies has materialized with the opening of the Great Rift, known in the Eldar lexicon as the Dethadian. This catastrophic breach in reality has unleashed warp storms across the galaxy, allowing the minions of the Dark Gods to emerge in unprecedented numbers. In these chaotic times, referred to by the Imperium as the Era Indomitus, a new deity, Niyat, the god of the dead, has come into being among the Eldar. While many have devoted themselves to this nascent god, others remain skeptical of the methods employed by the Inari, the so-called Reborn, who revere Niyat as their patron. The Eldar have not been this divided or beleaguered since the days of the Fall, and for the survivors, continued conflict seems the only path remaining. Despite the overwhelming numbers of their foes, who lack the Eldar's advanced technology, wisdom, and skills, the Eldar remain resolute. They are determined to ensure that the legacy of their once glorious race will not merely flicker out, but will ignite again with a renewed vigor.
But in recent days, the barriers between the Eldari factions have begun to crumble, with ever more gathering beneath the banner of one named Ivrain. These Inari keep their beliefs hidden as their intentions. Should they be encountered on the battlefield, caution will serve you well.
In our next video, we'll begin our exploration into the rise of humanity and the Chaos Gods.
For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. For in the grim, dark future, there is no peace amongst the stars, only the laughter of thirsting gods.
Do not fail your brothers. Though their bodies die, their spirit must return to the chapter. That is your charge.